Hello, everyone. This is Brian Graves again with Connens. I just wanted to let you know we're going to give everyone just one more minute to join, and then I'll begin the presentation. Thank you. Again, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for How to Solve Patient Pay with Propensity to Pay, Presumptive Charity, and Vendor Management Solutions. I'm Brian Graves. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Connens. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about some of the challenges that are facing revenue cycle executives today, some of the strategies you can employ in order to transform your organization's process into an advanced revenue cycle solution. But before I begin, I need to cover our disclaimer. The following information is not intended as legal advice and may not be used as legal advice. Legal advice must be tailored to the specific facts and circumstances of each case or inquiry. Every effort's been made to assure that the information contained in this presentation is up to date as of the date of publication. It's not intended to be a full and exhaustive explanation of the law in any area, nor should it be used to replace the advice of your own legal counsel. As I said, I'm Brian Graves. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Connens. And Connens is providing predictive analytic technology solutions to help hospitals, physician groups, and agencies improve net income, reduce costs, and improving the patient experience. So what I'd like to do is start out by talking about the landscape that many of you are faced with in the revenue cycle, and then talk about some of the strategies you can employ in order to address the significant rise in patient pay that has been created over the last 3 or so years, and then ultimately wrap up with some of the implications for how you can go about doing this. So today, we see revenue cycle executives are faced with a myriad of challenges, everything from ICD-10, looking at the rise of patient pay, to regulations with CFPB, and a variety of other challenges, simply trying to increase revenue in a landscape where much of what's happening is in flux. We can see from AHIP that their tracking of high deductible health plans has increased almost exponentially since 2005. So this means that more and more patient responsibility has creeped into the revenue cycle. What we're seeing today is with our clients, where even 3 years ago, the percentage of patient pay responsibility for total revenue was 5 to 7%. Today, it seems to be as much as 15 to 20%, and in another 3 to 5 years, we expect it to be as much as 30% of the overall revenue stream. So this means organizations' leaders are going to have to think differently about how to perform with patient pay accounts as a total mix of their revenue stream. What's also driving patient responsibility is ACA, which for many of the patients who have selected plans, they have chosen silver or bronze plans. And so from the analysis that you can see on this slide, bronze and silver have a considerable out-of-pocket expense for an example patient who was hospitalized, took 3 doctor's visits, had 20 PT visits. In essence, ACA plans are significantly tilted towards high deductible plans. And so this is simply adding to and exacerbating the already growing trend for the rise in patient pay. In addition to the complexity and revenue cycle are the relationships with agencies and vendors, where 10 or 15 years ago, most of the outsourcing existed around bad debt and secondary bad debt. It has increased over time to include more specialty agencies and vendors, including international, early out, workman's comp, and small balance. And so the relationships that organizations must contend with are growing more vast and complex. So organizations need to find ways in order to manage those relationships effectively while keeping the patient experience positive. In addition, the headlines have been out there, whether you're reading HFM Magazine or H&HN. The healthcare landscape continues to evolve, where we've just crossed over the threshold for ICD-10, and 501R was instituted at the end of 2014. We're now looking ahead to how can we make our revenue cycle more patient-friendly and to create the best process, whether we're looking at claims or self-pay. And so these stories really do have a foundation in reality. When we look at credit reporting for individual patients, much of what exists on credit reports stem from medical debt. So it's interesting to see that 50% of all credit report entries are for medical debt, and as many as 15% of all consumers have at least one medical debt item on their credit report. So those two statistics combined go to show that there are a lot of consumers that have much more than one medical debt item on their credit report. In addition, medical debt is the #1 reason for consumer bankruptcy. So, this all points to, as revenue cycle executives, we need to be very cognizant of how we're qualifying patients for charity and those that we actually are going to pursue for bad debt. Because, as we've seen with the CFPB, their interest is in inspiring organizations today in healthcare to have more patient-friendly processes and ensure that what we're doing with collections is fair and equitable for the patients we serve. So what I want to do next is run through some of the strategies that organizations can employ in order to make sure that we have the most effective processes in place for patient pay collections. By far, the #1 approach that organizations should be taking is starting with reviewing their in-source-outsource strategy. By that I mean taking a look at how are we thinking through the patient collections process. Which accounts do we keep in-house? Which accounts do we allow a vendor partner and agency to pursue? And what is the best way in order to look at our organizational resources to optimize that process. And so I think it first starts with an understanding of the resources available to us in-house so that we can best decide, do we have the resources to apply to at least some of the early stage collection processes? And what partners do we have within the agency realm in order to push out some of our accounts so that they can effectively help us make more effective collections, particularly for those harder to collect against accounts. And so I'll come back to that in a minute. But the idea is, if you don't have resources today in order to collect against patient pay, there could be strategies in which bringing on several resources might be the least expensive way in order to work some of your accounts. And so knowing what your current state is and looking out to a future state, this idea of in-source, outsource strategy can have a measurable impact on the bottom line. Clients in working with our clients, we've seen that organizations can save potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in agency commissions by bringing in the right accounts to be worked by internal resources while pushing out the harder to collect against accounts to early out agencies. And at the same time, we actually allow our early out agencies to perform more effectively if we can give them those accounts at day one, rather than working the accounts in a serial fashion by which we wait until day 45 or day 60 before we give them all of our accounts. And so there's a way to split the streams and essentially shotgun the collections process so that we keep the more responsible payers in-house, the easiest to collect, and we allow our agency partners to contact and collect against the harder to pay patient pay accounts. It's also important in the process to look to see who you have as partners today and determine if these are the right partners for this sort of a strategy. Second on this list is looking at the revenue cycle for patient pay collections holistically. There are many organizations who are looking at point of service on the front end of the process as a way to dramatically improve their collection experience for the patient. And it is most certainly a trend. It is most certainly the right approach in terms of starting the process right at the beginning. At the same time, we're encouraging organizations to look at the process holistically. So if you can make an impact to the back end of the process, where the lion's share of the problem will continue to exist from a sheer dollars perspective, if the back end of the process can be made more effective, that could allow for resources to be moved to the front so that as you're determining the right conversations to have with patients, that you don't need to add additional resources necessarily in the financial counseling process. And so we're encouraging our clients to look across the revenue cycle to determine the best strategy to employ both an effective point of service front end process as well as the business office follow-up on the back end. As I mentioned in the in-source, outsource strategy, there are ways that organizations can employ technology in order to determine who best to keep in-house and who best to provide to a partner agency for early out. So Conus employs this technology today in order to segment accounts into streams that will be worked differently based on the kind of patient payment behavior that we have for each one. So in our example here, correspondents can simplistically move accounts into a serve segment, a watch and wait segment, and an invest segment. And while there are certainly other segments that we employ, these are some of the simplest and easiest to talk about. Where conserve, we typically see are some of the most resistant to making payments for accounts. Watch and wait tend to be some of the most responsible patient payers. And investment refers to those folks that, while it may take a little extra effort to collect against them, the value is extremely high, therefore worth the investment. In Conus's approach, what we want to do is find the right patient and match them up to the right message at the right time in order to create the highest yield for the account and deliver the best patient experience. And so it's through a combination of the advanced propensity to pay, predictive analytics, with tailored workflow that results in creating that highest yield. So understanding that different types of patients need different types of engagement is critical to an optimized revenue cycle. And the result that we can see from this in our example, when we look at the percent of collection invested, the amount of effort that our organization put into each of the segments, we can see that there is a performance difference very significantly. And it is not completely related to the amount of investment. So for instance, segment 2, which is one of those watch and wait, a responsible payer segment, we can see that with little effort, we generated a significant amount of revenue, certainly not the highest, and our collection rate stayed very high. We see that in another segment, segment 4, which is close to the watch and wait and investment segments, with about double the effort, generated about 4 times the yield. So what we're trying to get our clients to see is that with pinpointed delivery of resources to the right accounts across the patient pay collection stream, we can have a dramatic impact to how we collect and ultimately what our yields are. Moving on to some of the regulatory issues. 501R is here to stay. As most of you know, at the end of December in 2014, the final regulations were issued. And so for 501R, we have a number of things that we need to be thinking about. First and foremost, are our policies and procedures around charity up to date? And if they're not, those need to be reviewed by the end of this year, beginning of next, so that if there are any audits, we can demonstrate that we have reviewed and incorporated the final regulations around 501R into them. Second, we can consider a presumptive charity approach to augmenting our current efforts around collecting a full application for charity determination. So what we're trying to avoid, of course, is the media attention that can come with organizations that are potentially seen as too aggressive in the collection process by putting liens against property and or garnishing wages, when in some cases that may not have been necessarily the best approach. We're all certainly trying to have the best patient experience regardless of the means to pay, and we're certainly trying to stay out of the spotlight while doing that. So when we think about extraordinary collection actions, the ECAs, as they call them in 501R, what we have to try to do is use our best efforts to classify patients as being eligible for charity, So certainly that starts with trying to collect the full application up front. And that's part of the point of service work that many organizations are thinking about today. How can I identify the right patient to have appropriate conversations with, whether it's payment plans and collecting a credit card or trying to collect a full application for charity. But as the accounts flow through, sometimes because of literacy issues, because of language barriers, full applications are not always collected. Organizations now can employ technology to create a safety net in order to capture the 20 to 30% of the bad debt that typically could have been classified as presumptive charity. And so before we are to send accounts to bad debt, this process of using a presumptive charity predictive analytic provides less risk and more confidence that the accounts that are with bad debt are the right ones in order to potentially use extraordinary collections action against where appropriate. And so this idea of using a predictive analytic for 501R and presumptive charity will help to reduce our overall risk. So in the 501R final regulations, it was written that it's considered reasonable efforts if hospitals determine eligibility using information other than that which is provided by individuals. So this is what provides the support in order to allow organizations to use a predictive analytic that grabs information about consumer activity from the real world in order to determine charity. The other part of it is that the method that you employ, whether it may be Connoisseur or other analytic for presumptive charity, it must be described in your financial assistance policies. And finally, no charity analytic can be used to deny treatment. So, for each organization, if a method like this is used on the front end, it really is best employed as a way to determine who might be best served by talking about and trying to gain a full application. So moving on to our agencies and vendor management to provide insight and help improve performance. What Connoisseur has found over the last 8 years is that, like many of you in other areas of the revenue cycle, what gets measured gets managed. And what Connoisseur has done with our agency manager platform is created an environment where organizations can more closely measure and monitor all of the agencies that are in their network on the platform. And what we're doing is providing operational reports on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. But we're also providing the ability to look at agency performance in network and an opportunity on a quarterly or semi-annual basis to compare performance outside the network. And so the graph on the left shows an example of a client analysis both in network in red and out of network in blue, so that any organization can understand, while the network performance may look good in the context of the network, it may or may not compared to other vendors nationally, regionally. And so among the other values that Connoisseur provides through our vendor management solution is an ability to not only monitor the performance on a daily basis so that we can help our agency partners improve their performance, but that we can actually understand the context of their performance in a much wider scope. What we typically see is organizations that are working with Connoisseur around vendor management can see anywhere from 10 to 30% increase in net recoveries. And the last recommendation I'd like to offer is patient satisfaction with the business office matters. I think this is not new news, but I wanted to highlight it because I think the work that we've done over the last 5 years in surveying patients and their experience with the billing office puts a fine point on this. So as we've done surveys over the last 5 years, the last one done in 2014, it puts a fine point on the patient payment behavior measured versus the satisfaction of the patients through surveys with the business office. So what we've seen is those patients who have been through a visit and received a bill and have gone through the collections process, those that were satisfied with the process, 70% paid their bills in full, compared to those that were unsatisfied with the billing process. Far, far fewer paid their bills in full, only 29%. And so we can see this very stark difference between those that were fully satisfied and their behavior in terms of recommendation, return for service, and payment behavior versus those that were unsatisfied. And across the top, you can see the number of patients, the sort of percent total of patients that were satisfied. Only 29% of those that were surveyed were fully satisfied. And so this demonstrates that we really have a long way to go in order to improve satisfaction with the billing process, which will ultimately help to support the payment behavior we're looking for, which is for many of them to pay their bills in full. So I just want to wrap up with a couple thoughts. As we can see, the revenue cycle is more complicated than ever, and patient responsibility is accelerating at a dramatic rate. We can see that AHIP has measured that rate from 2005 at over 700% increase over the last 10 years, and we don't see that abating. So this is becoming a critical issue for revenue cycle executives to look at all of their processes to see how they can most effectively manage and optimize patient pay, because the percent of the payer mix has this component of it increasing dramatically. We also see regulations increasing, among them with 501R and CFPB. So recommendations are to review your in-source outsource strategy, look at your vendor performance, measure the activity as well as outcomes. So look at the detail, look at what kind of outcomes vendors are delivering today, and work with them to have constructive conversations to improve their performance. The technology is critical, so where resources tend to be scarce, we can employ predictive analytics, we can employ technology in order to support a more effective process that will drive significant return on investment, and continue to watch the patient satisfaction with the billing process, because we know it has an impact on patient payment. So the value here is if we address these kinds of issues, the impacts to the revenue cycle are significant. Through increased cash, reduced costs, and enhancing the patient experience, we can have a dramatic impact on net income. So with that, I'm going to conclude the webinar for today. Very much appreciate everyone's attendance. We will provide an abbreviated replay of this on the Conant's website in about 2 weeks. So if you would like more information, please feel free to email me at bgraves, that's B-G-R-A-V-E-S, at Conants.com. And we look forward to talking to you all soon. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.